Hare Krishna. Very nice to see you.
All glories to Srila
My obeisance to you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So I'm very happy to introduce to all the our students of Bhaktivedanta University our today's presenter and speaker, disciple of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Visakha Devi. She is a wonderful devotee. She is wife of Yadubara Prabhu, and together with Yadubara Prabhu, they met with Srila Prabhupada in India. She wrote a wonderful book about her memories and experiences with Srila Prabhupada, and we were very much inspired by her book, and we thought that it would be wonderful if she could share these experiences with all our students. Now she's serving as the temple president in Bhaktivedanta Manor, which is in itself, I mean, I don't know, what shall I say about this? This is a very tremendous and very important service. Bhaktivedanta Manor is so dear to Srila Prabhupada, and it's one of the main temples of ISKCON all over the world. Still one of the headquarters of ISKCON, and she took this responsibility, and as far as I know, all the devotees are very, very appreciative of her service, the wisdom and maturity, and which is not difficult, not easy to to do it. So thank you very much. I don't want to really take the time. We're all eager to listen to you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for that sweet introduction, Maharaj. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvase Sasunyavadi Paskyata Deshatarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha, kripa sindhubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. I wish that I could be with you in person, but at least we can be together in this way. I'm very honored to be in your company, and just delighted that this Bhaktivedanta University has been started to really ground the entire Russian yatra in Prabhupada's teachings, and also especially his mood and his spirit. It's so important, these three things: his teaching, his mood, his spirit. And that will carry us for many generations personally toward him, and then collectively as a society. And I hope as the entire country, the Krishna consciousness has grown so tremendously in the former Soviet Union. It's very inspiring for all of us to hear about that. And I would love to be able to actually be there one day. Unfortunately, I've never been there. And to meet you personally and to see the impact that Krishna consciousness is having in Russia. So we have a presentation this morning. I'll just share my screen so that we can begin. It's shared. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can see it. And we can also hear you.
Great, good. So today we wanted to discuss Srila Prabhupada's teachings, an example of Vaishnava behavior as a balance of compassion and detachment. It's a very interesting way to approach this topic. Let's see what's happening here. That's weird. I think I'll have to do it. It's not forwarding.
We can try and restart your key point. What's the name of that program, Mac? Keynote. That's right. That's the one. You can try and restart it, because I saw all of your slides when you were trying to share it initially. So all of them are present there.
Yeah. Can we do it this way? This might be less.
That might be a bit challenging, but if you try to click on play again.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a basis for compassion from Bhagavad-Gita. All living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by the dualities arisen from desire and hate. So certainly one who has realized this, as Srila Prabhupada did, feel tremendous compassion for all living entities, especially for human beings, and they want to help them as best they can. And as for detachment, we see the example, the perfect example of detachment in Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna explains everything to Arjuna. And then he says, he's explained everything. And Arjuna is at liberty to deliberate on his as much as he can according to his intellectual power. And then he does what he wishes to do. So that is actually the supreme example of detachment. So Prabhupada had both of these fully. We could experience that, the compassionate aspect, seeing the suffering of the living entities, unnecessary suffering. He gave this very powerful analogy of the person who has left his parents, left his opulent home, and is on the street begging. So you can give him something, and he may fill his stomach for the day, but if you take him back to his home, to his loving parents, to his opulent situation, that's such an infinitely greater service. So similarly, all of us are meant to be with Krishna in his kingdom, but we're struggling in this material world unnecessarily. So the devotee wants to bring us back to our actual situation, spiritual situation. But the living entity has freedom to do as he or she wishes, which is exemplified in this verse, Bhagavad Gita 18:63. So we want to also see how Srila Prabhupada, as someone completely transcendental and perfectly humane at the same time, rather than just transcendental or just humane, affected his followers, their worldview, their faith, and their entire lives. That's our hope for this presentation this morning, or this afternoon or evening. So I've called it a bumpy journey toward harmony with the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a journey of self-discovery, a personal memoir in photographs. So it begins many years ago. As a child, I had a fascination with photography. This is a picture I took when I was about 9 years old. And I could not have expressed it at the time, but in retrospect, I was very confused about the world and why things were going on as they were. And I thought if I photographed it and studied it, I could figure it out. So I took pictures of everything. This is in my father's office in Manhattan. He has his back to the camera, and those are his employees and customers. This is in my hometown. I grew up near New York City, and this sort of thing really confused me, why women spent time and money to look like this. This was in the 1960s, and it was a time of great unrest in America. I participated in many demonstrations to try to get equal rights for Black people. It really hurt me to see how this group of people was treated so unfairly. And I participated in many more demonstrations to try to end the exceptionally cruel and unnecessary war in Vietnam. Then it came time for college, so I decided to major in photography. I specialized almost immediately in close-up photography. So on the right is soap bubbles, and each bubble is reflecting the window and the sky outside. This is something that may look unusual, but it's actually very familiar. These are grapes, close-up of grapes, purple grapes. This is what we call a red cabbage. Again, I was amazed that you get close to things and they become unrecognizable and often very beautiful. This is a dried bean pod of some sort. And this is the heart of an artichoke. I'm not sure if you have artichokes in Russia. They don't seem to have them in India, but they're quite common.
We do have them. We do have them.
Oh,
yes. Don't often have them though.
So over the summer, after my first year of college, I got work assisting a fashion photographer in Manhattan, New York City. And I became very disillusioned with that whole realm of photography because it seemed so superficial and artificial. And the effort was to get people to spend money that they didn't really need to spend, to get people to spend money unnecessarily. So I left that for good. I went back to college. I continued close-up photography. These are fingers. Over Christmas, I was still taking close-ups. I was taking a picture of a spoon, and my mother looked in the room and she said, "What are you doing?" And she came and looked over. So my mother is reflected in the surface of the spoon upside down. You can see her. She has a white blouse on. Is she visible?
Yes.
These are chemicals, photographic chemicals that have dried. This is a human hair dancing for the camera. And this one is an organic beet from our own garden, organic beetroot. So I took this, it was a term paper in college. I took it to a publisher and they turned it into a book. This is my legal maiden name. And it got some good reviews. Ralph Hattersley wrote for a popular photography magazine. Beaumont Newhall was a photographic historian. And W. Eugene Smith was a photojournalist. He was considered one of the 10 best in the world. So the next summer, I thought I would try to get involved in photojournalism. So I got work as an assistant for W. Eugene Smith. And I really admired his artwork as a photographer. He had a very compassionate, one would say, heart, and he was very expert in photography. This is one of a series of pictures he took in a leper colony in Africa. He really wanted to help people through his photography. He also took pictures during World War II. He thought if people saw the true horrors of war, they would take steps to end war. So I was impressed by that aspect of him, that quality he had. But I was also very disillusioned because as his assistant, I could see his life was a shambles. He was an alcoholic. He had a very acrimonious divorce from his wife. He wasn't speaking to his two children. He was living with a Japanese woman who was half his age, and they had a tumultuous relationship. So it left me very confused what I wanted to do with my life. And in college, I had met a friend who was also majoring in photography, who went to India, and from India, he wrote to me and said, "You should join me. The photography is great." So in 1971, I did that. I joined him in India. And it was a very unusual experience for me. I'd only been to Canada and the US prior to that. So it was quite striking, the difference. And it was also extraordinarily beautiful in parts. This is on the Jalangi River in Mayapur. And ordinary things were done in extraordinary ways for a Westerner. Even the animals were quite unusual. I never even knew that hogs ate stool prior to being in India. And the dogs in the West, the dogs are so pampered, but in India you could understand the term street dog. And they used animals as we use trucks in the West to transport goods from one place to another. And there were also disappointments. Some people who were supposed to be holy were not actually acting in a holy way, a saintly way. And after some time, it became very hot in India, physically hot and humid. And my friend and I were not used to that intense heat. So we left, we went to Nepal and started trekking up the Himalayas. And every night we'd come to a village where the doors had no locks, and the villagers would invite us in and share their vegetables and rice with us. And we had cashew nuts and raisins we would share with them. So that was truly extraordinary to feel that welcome amongst total strangers. And eventually we got to a place at the top of the mountain. It was about 10,000 feet. It's at the snow line. And we came to a shed there. And we decided to rest for a few days. And then my friend, from the bottom of his backpack, he pulled out a blue paperback and said, "You should read this." And that was Bhagavad-Gita as it is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So I love to read, so I tried to read it surrounded by snow-peaked mountains. But I found I couldn't understand it. I couldn't make head nor tail of it. But I did get a sense from this book that it could give me values and direction and instruction in my life that would help me. So it was a mystical experience. And as it happened, we left Nepal and we went back to India, and we went to a town in India where the people follow the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. The basic instruction is to always think of God, think of Krishna, to worship him, to become his devotees. And that's what they did in Vrindavan. We spent a month there, and I had entered Vrindavan as an atheist, but after a month I left it as a theist. It had such a profound impact on me. I really appreciated the simplicity in Vrindavan and the closeness with the animals, especially the cows. And we were very fortunate that in India we met the author of Bhagavad Gita as it is, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we were so moved by his personality, by his qualities, by his teachings, that we both became his students. And I spent the next 25 years studying his Bhagavad Gita as it is. And then I thought, I'd really like to explain this book so that even a child could understand it. So I wrote and illustrated a Bhagavad Gita for children, our most dear friend. And by Krishna's grace, it sometimes does well on Amazon. Amazon changes its ratings every hour, so things bounce around. So this is these are some illustrations from this book. It begins as the Gita begins by explaining there's a difference between the soul and the body. That wherever there is life, a soul is present. Whether it's the body of a bug or a bird or a fish or an animal or a human being. And the body goes through so many changes, but the soul does not. The soul is eternal. Krishna gives the analogy that just as we change clothes, we give up old clothes and take on new clothes. So at the time of death, the soul gives up the old useless body and takes on a new body. And Krishna explains that when we understand his teachings, we'll become joyful. And we won't forget our higher spiritual nature, even if there's trouble. We won't be disturbed. And we'll see that all living beings are part of Krishna, part and parcel of Krishna, and they're his children. And we'll be kind, we'll be compassionate to all living beings, knowing that they're dear to him. And he gives this beautiful analogy how everything rests on him as pearls rest on a thread, that he knows all that's happening in the past and the present and the future. Even the blades of grass move by his desire. Everything comes from him and rests upon him. There's no truth above him, and he is also our most dear friend. So when that was finished, I thought I would do one for adults, an illustrated Bhagavad-Gita for adults. And this, by Krishna's grace, this was recognized by non-devotees. This is my father-in-law. On the right side, he was in his 20s, and on the left side, he was in his 80s. So the body has changed completely, but it's the same person because the same soul resides within that body. Krishna explains in the Gita that there are different types of miseries in this world, whether it's birth, old age and disease, or death, but all embodied beings experience these miseries. They're unavoidable for those of us who are embodied. And we're called marginal energy. The soul is marginal, just as the beach is the margin between the water and the land. So sometimes the land is covered by water, and sometimes the water recedes. So similarly, sometimes we're covered by the material energy, and at that time we think, I'm Russian, I'm American, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm old, I'm young. And sometimes by the grace of the spiritual master and the grace of God, that covering of illusion recedes, and then we can understand that I'm not any one of those designations, but I'm a spiritual being, part and parcel of Krishna, of God. Also, the analogy is there that the soul is like a bird and the body is like a cage. So at the time of death, the soul leaves the birdie as the bird flies out of the cage. So this is my husband, Yadubara Prabhu, who initially invited me to come to India with our younger daughter, Hari Priya, who's going to be married in about 10 days. So this also illustrates a very important principle of the Gita, that the father has provided everything for the child. There's nothing the child has that hasn't come from the father. But when the child takes a simple cracker and offers it to the father with love, the father so much appreciates that simple offering. He appreciates the love. So similarly, Krishna has given us everything that we have. But if we take our possessions and offer them to him with genuine devotion, he's very pleased by that offering. Also, the Gita explains that there are godly and ungodly people throughout the world living side by side. And if we understand the teachings of the Gita, we can learn to distinguish the godly from the ungodly and then associate with the godly so that we may also one day become godly ourselves. So while we were doing these projects, my husband and I were moving, traveling, living in different places according to our other work. And eventually we moved to Los Angeles because we wanted to be near my father-in-law, who was very elderly at that time. And when he passed away, we thought, well, now we can live anywhere. And we chose to move to Sharanagati in British Columbia, Canada, because we wanted our children to grow up in a more natural environment. Sharanagati was a drastic change from Los Angeles and New York. We purchased this small house there. The unique feature of Sharanagati is that it's off the grid. That means there's no electricity from the powerhouse. So the two rectangles underneath the window on the right are solar panels. They captured the energy from the sun, and that was fed into batteries. And then we used the electricity from the batteries. So we had computers, we had lights, we had electric toothbrushes, but what we did not have was a bill from the electric company because our electricity was homemade. And in Sharanagati, we felt closer to the earth and the water and the sky, Krishna's great elements. Many of our pictures here were taken from our front porch, including this one. And that's Lake Sharanagati shining through the fir trees there. So I started writing about this experience. It's called Harmony in the Bhagavad-Gita. And it begins with harmony within, because we can't expect to have harmony in our family or society unless we have internal harmony personally ourselves. At the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, as we know, Arjuna is in a crisis, and Krishna encourages him to be resolute, to keep focused. In our front yard in Sharanagati, we had ant mounds, and I saw that when the ant mounds were disturbed, there was frenzied activity amongst the ants. But somehow each ant knew just what to do, and they didn't become depressed or discouraged or negative. Whereas when humans become uncomfortable, they tend to become depressed and negative and disappointed, depressed. It was interesting to compare the ants with the humans in that stressful situation. We also had summer camp in Sharanagati. For one project, we used some old wood and put some more wood through our own Sharanagati sawmill to make planks. And the children, the campers themselves, nailed the planks onto the logs and created this raft. And they paddled around on Lake Sharanagati in their homemade raft. This is our younger daughter with her own horse, Adi. The children there had their own horses. So the second part of this little project was harmony with the earth and the creatures of the earth. There are bears in Sharanagati. When people hear about that, they decide not to visit. But in fact, the bears are afraid of people. But when no one's looking, they would eat the apples off our apple trees and dig up our carrots and eat the carrots. The campers found this lizard and they were quite delighted by it. Krishna also talks about the importance of balance in our lives. Sometimes we find that devotees' lives become unbalanced. They don't get proper diet. They don't get the rest they need. They don't spend enough time with their families. But to prosecute spiritual life long-term, balance is very important. These campers discovered that if they held the gamsha, which is a thin Indian towel, between them, they could create a sail. And they sailed the whole length of Lake Sharanagati, which is 1 mile long. And when they got to the end, they were stuck. We had to rescue them because they didn't know how to tack. Tacking is, anyway. But they had a great time. So this is part 3, harmony with others. We started off harmony within and harmony with the earth and her creatures. So this perhaps is more challenging, harmony with other people. So the Gita talks about envy, that Arjuna is qualified to hear Bhagavad Gita because he is free from envy. Envy is a great relationship destroyer. This is our daughters in the center, and twins who are her friends are on the left and right. This is our homemade hammock in the backyard of our home. So we try collectively in Sharanagati to advance spiritually and really genuinely want the success of others in the community. And through this chanting, we can overcome the lower forces that sometimes influence us, like envy, lust, greed. This is our daughter on a horse, Adi, with her, one of the twins riding the other horse. These children grew up without television, and they're okay. They came out okay. So this is the fourth and final part. It's the wellspring or the source of harmony. The Krishna explains in the Gita that from him comes an impersonal, all-pervasive energy, Brahman. And he's also Paramatma, the super soul within the heart of each and every living entity, as the witness, the guide, the overseer, the friend. And he's also Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is a tree house that was built by a 12-year-old resident who continued to grow up in Sharanagati and later on built his own home and got married and now has 4 children. And he's currently the president of Sharanagati village. The need of the spirit soul is that it wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage and fulfill its desire for complete freedom. It wants to see the free light and the spirit. In Sharanagati, we used wood from the property to heat our homes. And for water, we found an aquifer at the bottom of the mountain, and it was higher than our house. So we piped, it was gravity fed into our house. We did not need electricity to get water. In the evenings and the nights, we make a campfire and read from Mahabharata near the lake. This is Changing Bodies in Sharanagati. The lower picture was taken in the year 2000 and the upper picture in 2011. On the right is Rasa, and next to her is her twin, Kava. Each one is 11 years apart. In the middle is Kalindi, who's now in the UK, one of the Kirtaniyas there. Next to her with the hat is Gopal, who still resides in Sharanagati. She's married. She just had a baby girl a week ago. And on the left is our daughter, Haripriya. So this became a book. And in the meantime, my husband and I also made some films about Prabhupada's movement, his philosophy, the activities of his followers. We made about 8 or 9 films. And I made a short film, just a 24-minute film about my experiences coming to Krishna consciousness by the grace of Srila Prabhupada. And then I thought I should really figure out what happened to me, because I had such a dramatic change in my life. These are my parents. My father was brought up in the Judaic tradition, very strict. And my mother in the Roman Catholic, also very strict. And when they came of age, they both decided that religion was ritual without any substance, without any philosophical foundation. So they both gave up religion completely, and they raised my brother and me as atheists. Our whole life growing up, we never went to any church or synagogue or temple of any type. And I was quite an avid atheist. Yet at the same time, I was quite concerned because I saw my father worked so hard, and yet for reasons beyond his control, his business was slipping away from him. Financially, he was in a difficult position. He spoke fluent Russian, as it was. This is in He would go 2 or 3 times a year to Russia for his business. But it left me very confused. This is in that mountaintop that I mentioned, where we stopped for 3 or 4 days on our trekking. And I was quite, I saw so much emptiness around me and within myself. And I was really, although I don't know if I would have expressed it at the time, but I was really searching for something meaningful, something that would give genuine happiness. So even though I was surrounded by beauty, within there was great confusion and turmoil within myself. And I felt myself to be a foreigner, but of course everyone else, especially the children, saw me as the foreigner. They thought if they stared at me long enough, they could figure me out. At least that's how it seemed. But I was very taken by the quality of service that I saw so pervasive in India. The parents serving the children, the older children serving the younger children. That quality of giving to others selflessly seemed to me to be something truly admirable. And also I appreciated the family community orientation in India that I felt was lacking in the West. In the West, you can live next door to someone for decades and not know anything about them. But in India, that's not possible, for better or worse. And these values were still present in the country, although they were diminishing in the cities. The cities were very influenced by Western materialism. But in the country, these values of giving selflessly, of serving others, of focusing on the higher truths of life were still very prominent. So I really deeply appreciated the beauty of India and the values of the culture. We would travel around extensively by train and could see that people still very much depended on animals for their agricultural pursuits. And that also attracted me profoundly. It seemed something very real to work the soil and get the necessities of life in that way, rather than create something that was useless and try to persuade others to purchase these useless things. But it was actually in Vrindavan that I was most impacted, as I mentioned. I entered Vrindavan, as I said, as an atheist, but when I experienced the intensity of the faith of the residents of Vrindavan, it dawned on me that I was an atheist because my parents were atheists. It wasn't a choice that I had made independently. And to be surrounded by people with so much faith, and as a result of their faith, they had so much richness in their lives. In the West, the whole orientation was to get a good education, to get a good job. A good job meant you made a lot of money. That was the definition, unspoken, of a good job. And then with that money, you could be comfortable, you could be influential. In Vrindavan, they had none of those things. They very often did not have a good education. They did not have money. They did not have comforts or influence, but they had a sense of satisfaction that was palpable. And that satisfaction was missing in the West, to the extent that people were full of distress. So I really had to stop. I had been exposed to the chanting earlier in New York, but it didn't have the same impact on me as it did in Vrindavan. These widows, I would sit with the widows every morning for 3 hours as they chanted the Maha Mantra. And they didn't have a lot of musical skills. They didn't necessarily have very good singing voices, but they did have tremendous devotion. So the whole atmosphere of Vrindavan was steeped in devotion to Krishna. And it became, despite myself, I became very affected, positively affected by that. And we were so fortunate that Prabhupada was there to explain very systematically and scientifically about the science of self-realization. He also gave us wonderful association. This is Prabhupada's sister, Pishima. We went to the Calcutta temple, my husband and I, and Pishima was there during the day. And although she didn't speak English, there was a lot of impact she had on the devotees by her bhakti, by her devotion. And Prabhupada personally would take us around for some time to the holy places here. He's on a bus going to Vrindavan. He also introduced us to Srila Mayapur, such a beautiful and potent spiritual destination. Prabhupada in his room in Radha Damodar Temple in 1972. And he very kindly accepted me as his disciple. And I was just thrilled when I realized that I could do what I love to do, photography, but do it with a spiritual intent, do it in Prabhupada's service. So I started taking pictures of him and his followers. And that was such a impetus for me, because it wasn't that I had to leave behind photography, but rather I could engage it. This is on the rooftop in Delhi. I'm sorry, in Juhu. Prabhupada dancing in his room in Mayapur. On the left, you can see two hands clapping. You can see, so that's Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Swami. He came to visit Prabhupada. And they talked about their old times together in India before Prabhupada had come to America. And then they had kirtan together, which was ecstatic. And of course, Prabhupada established these wonderful programs to help villagers nearby. He didn't want anyone to go hungry within a 10-mile radius of our temples. And these amazing festivals, Rath Yatra, where thousands of people could be introduced to this wonderful culture of Krishna consciousness. So I photographed him as much as I could, and he was very supportive, Srila Prabhupada. I'm on the left there. But he was surrounded by young followers, male followers, who were not as understanding or supportive as Srila Prabhupada, who sometimes made life quite difficult and challenging for me to do my service. And Prabhupada himself had many, many challenges. He would get letters from all over the world where his followers would express their personal problems, the problems they were having with relating to other devotees, the problems they were having preaching to non-devotees, the legal problems they were facing, financial problems, problems with their parents. And Prabhupada patiently answered each and every letter. He said that to be responsible means to respond. So he never received a letter that he did not reply to. And if you read the letters today, they're full not only of guidance, practical guidance, also philosophical guidance, and also encouragement. There is a consistent thread of encouragement throughout Prabhupada's letters. There are almost 7,000 letters that he wrote. One of his disciples on the left, Jamuna Devi. George Harrison of the Beatles was so impressed by the quality of her voice. He told her that he could make her internationally famous and, of course, also wealthy. And she said she wasn't interested. She simply wanted to serve Srila Prabhupada. I was able to photograph for her cookbook, Lord Krishna's Cuisine. This is milk and milk products. She made an award-winning vegetarian cookbook. In 1977, Prabhupada returned to India and was very ill. The residents, as well as his followers, are very concerned about him. And he passed away November 14th, 1977. So all these reflections became this book, 5 years, 11 months, and a lifetime of unexpected love. And it was by Niranjana Swami's grace. It was made also into Russian, although I understand the editing didn't do justice to the original translation. And it got some good reviews by Krishna's grace. My husband and I also made this film that I think you also saw in Russia. It's an 1.5-hour film about the Hare Krishna movement centered on Srila Prabhupada. So that is a bumpy journey toward harmony with the Bhagavad-Gita. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was a visual delight and also a visual meditation. As Srila Prabhupada used to say, that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And I could personally say this about the book that you wrote, 5 years and 11 months, and that Srila Prabhupada comes through your writings and your remembrances of him as, I don't know if I could say that, even more attractive, more potent, because it was reflected, his potency and his beauty and his compassion were amplified and reflected through your personal experience. In Bhaktivedanta University, what we do is we invite such disciples of Srila Prabhupada as yourself and try to glean Srila Prabhupada in different aspects of his teachings, personality, through your eyes and your heart, your experiences with him. And each and every speaker adds a unique perspective from him. But now that we've seen some famous photographs of Srila Prabhupada, I'm sure some of our students and myself will go, oh, now I know why Srila Prabhupada looked so attractively, because it was his disciple who took a picture of him, not just through the camera, but also through her heart and through her love. So thank you so much. We can now, it's so important to know who is behind our success and things we take for granted, because these pictures that you took and the films you made, we grew up on them. Some of the pictures are on our altar, and some of the films are on our computers, and we show these films to our guests in the temple. And now we know who's behind them. Maybe you could, yes, please go ahead.
In making the films, my husband and I always thought that if we could get out of the way in terms of our ego, false ego, and Prabhupada could be present as much as possible in the film, then they would be successful. So that was our prayer.
But you cannot completely remove yourself from the picture, because Prabhupada says that even Krishna is not particularly beautiful without his devotees. That's his statement in the Krishna book. So you cannot remove yourself and other disciples without sacrificing the description of full glory of Srila Prabhupada, really.
No, we didn't want to remove ourself. We wanted to remove our false self, the self that's covered by ignorance, compassion, and goodness.
Maybe we still have a lot of time, actually. We have gone through, about 15 minutes of our class, and we really would love to hear some personal experiences with Srila Prabhupada, so we could you could glean from your experience the topic that we have stated and chosen for the session today, as to how Srila Prabhupada combined both his transcendental position, and usually transcendental position is seen or conceived of by people as something completely remote, aloof, even callous sometimes. And I guess in your book you also write about some of Prabhupada's followers who tried in their immaturity to copy what they thought was transcendental of Srila Prabhupada's personality, but at the same time you also depict him as so humane, so compassionate, so attentive, so sensitive, so emotionally involved and invested in his disciples. And this is how, at least from what I understand reading your book, how you yourself became transformed. You found in Srila Prabhupada someone who loved you, but also someone who, by his love, could also lead you to higher realms of human and devotional levels of consciousness. So if you could kindly share with us some of these experiences with Srila Prabhupada, and I'm sure we'll have many questions as well from our students. Thank you.
Well, in one sense, this sense of compassion and detachment that we found in Prabhupada, that's the result of spiritual maturity, so it can't be imitated or achieved prematurely. It comes from sincere, attentive practice over who knows how long. That's one sense we could look at it from. But I think the idea of absorbing ourselves in that example and using that as our North Star, as it were, to guide us is very important and very valid. And so part of it is to honor each person. I think that was in our immaturity. Sometimes that's something that we overlooked. But there's a beautiful pastime when there were some book distributors during the 70s when book distribution was in full gear, full force. And they went to Prabhupada and they explained to him, these are the book distributors who excelled in their service. And they told Prabhupada that they wanted to travel to his centers and train the devotees what to say to have people stop walking, what to say so they hold the book, what to say so they give a donation for the book. And in that way, they felt they would increase not only the number of books distributed, but also the donations given for the books. So Prabhupada heard their plan in its completion. And then he said, you simply teach the devotees how to be sincere. And if they're sincere, Krishna from within their heart will tell them what to say. He said, each person is their own genius. Each person is their own genius. So again, if we can remove the coverings, the layers of coverings caused by the material energy, then Krishna will help us. So this, to me, this gives a very strong sense of Prabhupada's faith in Krishna and faith in the process of bhakti, that if we can simply try to engage in it sincerely, Krishna will help us. So that is an example of, I would say, his compassion, that no one is overlooked, no one is minimized. Each one is seen as something so incredibly valuable, so incredibly important because of Krishna's presence there, both in terms of the jiva and in terms of Paramatma. And so it's up to us how to best evoke their presence, manifest their presence. That's up to us individually. But the sense of encouraging devotees has so much importance. Again, I think it's underestimated in our movement. But if we look at Prabhupada through the lens of encouragement, we'll find, as I was saying, this continuous thread that just encourage the devotees, give them the basics of the philosophy, give them the wonderful aspect of regular sadhana, and then see where they can apply their particular talents. And my then boyfriend, later husband, and I, when we went to Prabhupada, we were in Bombay, and Prabhupada had just completed the very first Pandal festival in Bombay, which was amazingly successful, a 10-day program. Each day, 20,000 people came. On the weekends, it would go up to even more. The Pandal was a huge tent, and it would just be packed with people. And they would see the Western devotees worshiping the deities, chanting and dancing, distributing prasadam. Very successful. So when that concluded and Prabhupada was going to continue his travels, my husband and I thought we would like to do a National Geographic style article about a quaint Indian village where they didn't use machinery. They relied on the oxen, and they would see dramas by the villagers under the starlit sky and so forth. But we didn't know what village to go to, because there are thousands and thousands of villages in India. So we thought, well, we'll ask Prabhupada. He's traveled throughout India. He's very familiar with the Indian villages. We'll ask him where we should go. So we went to him in his room. This was in Bombay, and we told him our plan. And he looked at us with a mixture of gravity and amusement. And he said, "You do not speak the language. Wherever you go, they will simply cheat you and steal your cameras." Prabhupada was very realistic, along with all his other qualities, very practical. And we knew it was true. We'd already been pickpocketed. So then he paused. It was a pregnant pause, as they say. And he said, "Best you go to Vrindavan and you do your story in Vrindavan," which is why we eventually went to Vrindavan. That was his instruction. So, at that point, he had no idea about my background as an atheist. I had just met him briefly. But in retrospect, there could not have been a better instruction for him to give me than to go to Vrindavan, because that was so transformative, as I mentioned. So, that's really astonishing. That's truly astonishing. And you can only say it comes from his purity, that he would be able to do that. There's nothing that can be attained artificially or imitated. So it means that all of us must practice bhakti to the best of our ability, practice the regulative principles, practice the sadhana, and pray for that ability to help people in such a profound way as Prabhupada did, and to honor each individual also, regardless of the body that individual happens to be in. Did that make any sense at all? Or address your question? Or your point?
Thank you. It did start to address it. Because we have Bhaktivedanta Maharaj. He wanted to ask a question. Maharaj.
I don't really have a question. I'm very moved by your presentation. And I think that's what we need, because in the beginning you said that the whole enterprise of Bhaktivedanta University is not only about the teachings, but also about the mood and the spirit. And you really managed to transfer some mood. But, if I am to ask any question, then I would ask, what is in Srila Prabhupada and his personality which made him so influential? What actually, if you may single out just one, characteristics of Srila Prabhupada, which is was the most important or instrumental in his mission to influence other people. How would you define this? Because we as a preachers, we also want to follow Prabhupada's example. So what quality we should cultivate in ourselves to serve him better?
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. What in Srila Prabhupada's personality made him so influential? I suppose that could be answered in many, many different ways. But I would say, to put it in one word, his care. And of course, that has so many implications, his care. In that his care meant that he genuinely wanted to help others. And the fact that he was not out to exploit made him unique practically amongst humanity. You know, there's just so much exploitation and lack of caring of what other people are experiencing, lack of empathy. But the fact that he did empathize and he wanted to help, he genuinely wanted to help because he cared. You know, and there was a time when the Radha Damodar bus party was traveling very actively, and they assembled in Chicago when Srila Prabhupada visited Chicago. And they brought all the newcomers that they had introduced Krishna consciousness to. There was about 70 people who got initiated in Chicago when Srila Prabhupada was there. So one of them came up to get initiated, and his dhoti was torn. And Prabhupada turned to Tamal Krishna Goswami, who was standing next to him, next to the Vyasasan, and said, "Can't you provide for the devotees? Why is he coming forward with a torn dhoti?" You know, there are many small incidents like that. That Prabhupada was attentive and really wanted the devotees to be well situated materially, as well as, of course, spiritually. There was another time in New Vrindavan, there was an evening darshan with Srila Prabhupada, and it got chilly. And one of the devotees didn't have a cheddar. She was just in her choli and sari. And Prabhupada said to her, "Aren't you feeling cold? Where's your, no sweater?" No. And she was so astonished that Prabhupada had seen her and recognized her and asked her that to this day, she's still in New Vrindavan, and she opened up a thrift store there so that no one will go cold in New Vrindavan. She sells cheddars and saris and cheddars and sweaters and everything, so that people can get what they want at a very reasonable price. And if they don't have enough, she'll give it to them. So this idea of caring from all angles, from the material angle, from the spiritual angle, the emotional angle, every angle, and genuinely caring without any tinge of taking advantage of the other person, made him so compelling, irresistible.
Thank you.
Дорогие преданные, если у вас есть вопросы, вы можете писать вопросы в чате. Здесь или поднимать. Да, я вижу его вопрос уже. And there's a question from one devotee, student of our university, who says, "Thank you so much for this presentation. How did Srila Prabhupada interact with his godbrothers in spreading the mission of Sri Chitanya Mahaprabhu as the leader of Krishna consciousness, or the spread of Krishna consciousness in the West? Because you also documented his interaction with his godbrothers, for instance, Sridhara Swami. You write about it in your book. And so how did Srila Prabhupada interact with them in both of his roles as their godbrother and also as the unquestionable leader of Krishna consciousness movement in the West?"
Yeah, thank you. As we know, some of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers were not at all supportive of his efforts. to fulfill the desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And others were very appreciative and supportive. So it was quite individual. That our first exposure to Srila Prabhupada with his godbrothers was in Mayapur in 1972, if I remember, that when Prabhupada laid the foundation stone for the Mayapur temple, he invited his godbrothers in Mayapur to come for that occasion. And they had prasadam together, and Prabhupada had them sit on the stage with him. We didn't have a proper building at that time. We just had another pandal. And some of them spoke, Prabhupada spoke. So there was respectful dealings at that time. I would say that we weren't really introduced to his godbrothers so much. It was later on that Sridhar Swami came to Mayapur, Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Swami, and they had a wonderful, wonderful interaction. Sridhar Swami was just so appreciative of Prabhupada's accomplishments and so encouraging to us also, Prabhupada's followers. It was very moving to see that he didn't have this envy that some of his other godbrothers exhibited. It was very enlivening. And if you've ever read any of his books, Sridhar Swami, he's very lucid in his explanation of Krishna consciousness, sometimes poetic, and such insights he has, it's really enlivening to see. So to find him also so genuinely supportive and appreciative of Prabhupada and of Prabhupada's followers was very nourishing for us, I must say. And there was another time Prabhupada visited B.V. Puri Maharaj in his ashram in Visakha. There was a few of us traveling with Prabhupada at that time. We were on our way from Madras to Calcutta. So we stopped in Visakha, which is right on the ocean. And we stayed in that Gaudiya Math ashram with Prabhupada. And it was wonderful to see. They were like brothers, you know, they would laugh together, Prabhupada and B.V. Puri Maharaj, and exchange pleasantries and talk about their former history together. It was a very different Prabhupada from the one that we knew, to see him in that relationship. So it was very different. They cooked for us in their Gaudiya Math style and would fill us up to the necks. And we allowed ourselves to be filled up to the necks and beyond, which is not a great, not a great example. But yeah, they treated us really well. So that part was enlivening. So it was very individual, I guess you could say, Prabhupada and his godbrothers, according to their response to his attempts to please his spiritual master.
Thank you so much. There's another question from Pavana Prabhu. He's a leader in southern Russia. And he says, thank you very much for your story, for the presentation, and for your example in your life. Really, because Pavana Prabhu is also a Grihastha, family devotee, he says, I would like to live my life of a Grihastha the way you did with your husband. And I was particularly moved by how Srila Prabhupada, as you emphasized, he didn't just give philosophy and practice, but he also gave people faith in themselves, in their spiritual self. We need not just techniques, but we need to teach people sincerity, and everything else will be given to us by Krishna. Krishna will give us hints as to how to develop. And the question is, sometimes Srila Prabhupada is presented as a all-compassionate, all-forgiving Vaisnava, but he also manifested wrath and strictness. He was not your like sugary, syrupy sadhu who would always smile and would like to be liked by everyone and try to be liked by everyone. Somehow these two qualities lived harmoniously in him, his strictness and his compassion. How was that they both stayed or lived in his heart? And how we are supposed to emulate his example and manifest them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a very insightful question. And it's very true that Prabhupada was not the warm, fuzzy guru who would overlook things that should not be overlooked. But if we make a study of what he reacted strongly against, then we'll see it's not personal weaknesses, but philosophical deviations. For example, if he saw a publication of his where his name was not mentioned, then he saw that, he had to put his natural humility aside, that he was the founder Acharya of our institution and he had to be recognized as such, and he would speak strongly about that. Or for another example, in Los Angeles, when there was this Gopi Bhava club coming up, where his disciples would get together and just read about intimacies with Krishna and his Gopi companions, Prabhupada was so strong against that. He saw that would ruin everything. So he spoke out against that very strongly. So in this way, we can see consistently that when there was any threat to the purity of his teachings, he would speak strongly against that, whether it was a philosophical misunderstanding or whatever it may be. But when there was personal weakness in someone, sannyasis would, when sannyasi fell down, someone that had done tremendous service became lost and became a grihasta. And when Prabhupada saw him again, he finally came to Mayapur to see Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, "So where's your wife? Why have you come without your wife?" There was nothing, there was no harshness there at all. Whatever position you're in, be in a position that's right for you and go on with Krishna consciousness. So that's an important distinction for us to make, I think. And again, this idea of encouragement cannot be underestimated. I just arrived in Alachua and I turned on the class for the first time from Alachua, and a very senior devotee, disciple of Prabhupada, was saying, "Oh, we went on Harinam. There was a football game. There were 100,000 people. And it was just old people there singing from our temple. Where are all the young people? Why aren't you coming?" It's like, okay, the young people weren't there, but what were they doing? They're laying out back to Godhead. They're working at Krishna.com. Sometimes they're having these concerts where people come and hear the beautiful singing and hear the excellent musical accompaniment. They're doing whatever it is, they're doing something. So to rant and rave, see the glass is half empty. I'm not sure it's having the effect that we want it to have. It just happened yesterday, so I'm just expressing that. But to encourage goes a long way.
Thank you. Another question is from Amala Govinda Prabhu, a yatra leader from the Urals, from the middle portion of Russia. He says that to be a photographer is a very difficult service. Sometimes photographers get in people's ways. Did Srila Prabhupada ever indicate to you that it was enough photos taken already? And if he did, how did he do that?
Yeah, Prabhupada generally appreciated that photographs would be helpful for his publications and for his followers. There were times, however, for instance, when he gave lectures, he didn't want photographers running around. He wanted everyone to sit and patiently hear him. It was okay during the prayers at the beginning, Jai Radha Madhava, but during the lecture, he expected everyone to sit quietly and simply patiently hear. So he impressed that upon us. I was not the only photographer. There were 3 photographers from the BBT, and we all experienced the same thing, that we were expected by Prabhupada to sit and hear the class patiently and not photograph at that time. And then other than that, it was pretty much we could have free reign. There was a time when we were walking in Tirupati. We had just traveled there, and the devotees who were with Prabhupada went into their various cottages where they were going to spend the night. But I stayed with Prabhupada, and he sat down in an area that was covered with, surrounded by greenery. It was a very beautiful area. He sat down. So I sat at his feet to photograph him, and he looked at me and he said, "Is it necessary?" So I realized that he just wanted to recuperate from the traveling and have a little peace. So I scurried away. So there are no pictures in that situation. So that was my insensitivity. But generally, he was very accommodating to that service and to filming also.
Thank you so much. Could I put a photograph up on the screen and ask you to comment
Sure.
on that picture, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Here. Was it taken in Vishakhapatnam?
Yeah, that was in Visakhapattnam that we were going to take darshan of the temple nearby there. And Prabhupada saw that flower, and he mentioned that flower is the color of Lord Chaitanya.
It's such a famous picture and so beautiful by itself.
Mm.
It's just like two flowers looking at each other.
Yeah.
And I had a question to ask in this connection. I have a friend, a devotee friend. And before he became a devotee, he used to be a producer of the MTV channel in Ukraine. And then he became a devotee, became a disciple of His Holiness Niranjana Maharaj. And just like you were able to use your expertise in devotional service, he was also asked by devotees to edit some videos because he was very good at videography and video editing. And once he was asked to produce a short video of Srila Prabhupada for his Vyasa Puja to show to devotees. So he took a few different recordings, probably many of them were taken by you. And then he started combining them together, editing them. And he had to go down to a frame. As you know, there are 25 or something like that frames per second. So he was going frame by frame through short clips of Srila Prabhupada's videos or films. And then what he noticed, to his amazement, is that every single frame of Srila Prabhupada was 25 a second, was perfectly composed. There was no single frame, and he started looking for them, and he couldn't find any frame of Srila Prabhupada where his face was distorted or showing some unbecoming impressions, was not aesthetically pleasing. And that doesn't happen. He said, I saw people's videos, and you can easily catch them in with very silly or strange expressions in their faces and strange, but not with Srila Prabhupada, down to a frame, 25 per second. So was it your experience as well with Srila Prabhupada? You took thousands of photographs of him. Was it something magic in that fact that Prabhupada was perfect down to a frame? If that was your experience.
Yeah, his facial expressions were innumerable. He had innumerable facial expressions that were quite remarkable. And each one in itself was quite aesthetically pleasing, I would say. We had a similar experience in that there was a bell hanging from the ceiling in the Mayapur temple with a long rope. And the ceiling is quite high there. And Prabhupada would, when he circumambulated Radhamadava at the end of the class, he would stop by the bell and pull the rope. And we found that he did it exactly in time with the kirtan, which is not easy to do when you're having a 20-foot rope, to time it so that when you pull, the bell sounds just at the right moment in the kirtan. But he did that continually. There were two bells, one on each side of the deities. He did that continually each time he circumambulated. So it was a similar remarkable, how did he do that? To calculate the length of the rope and pulling it would enable the bell to ring just at the right moment in time with the rhythm of the kirtan.
Thank you. There's another question from Shyama Hladini Devi. Please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you so much for this meeting, for this presentation. How do disciples of Srila Prabhupada continue deepening their relationships with him today, after his physical departure? What do they pay attention to? Or maybe she is asking about, because it's not clear from the way it's worded. Матаджи, Шьяма Хладини, вы говорите о отношениях между собой учеников Шрилы Прабхупады или об отношениях со Шрилой Прабхупадой? Просто не совсем ясно из того, как вы задали вопрос. And what do they pay attention to in their relationship with each other? Yeah, with each other, not with Srila Prabhupada. She just clarified. And what do devotees lack in their proper relationships these days, from your point of view?
I think we have to look to Prabhupada's example as far as deepening the relationship, our relationship with our spiritual master, with Srila Prabhupada, in that his meditation was always on fulfilling the instructions of his spiritual master. And that was like, you start with a seed, and as you nourish that seed, it expands and expands and expands into this massive tree. You know, sometimes in unexpected ways, sometimes in surprising ways. So similarly, we all have the instruction from our spiritual master, from Srila Prabhupada. And as we nurture that, again, using that term sincerity, then it will grow. It will grow within ourselves, and we'll see something that maybe even surprises us as a result of that nurturing. So to always keep ourselves immersed in the foundational principles, going back to the very scriptures that Prabhupada emphasized, the Bhagavad-Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chitanya Charitamrita, and drawing strength from that and allowing it to remain fresh, never considering that we've already read it, we already know it. That becomes very dangerous. But if we can share that with others, that reading and those understandings, then we'll find that's very nurturing for this Bhakti Lata Bij, this seed of devotion. Over the years, we've had a number of reading groups, and just to sit together patiently and to attentively read Prabhupada's books and to hear other people express their understandings, ask their questions, get involved in discussions, see it from different points of view, relate it to what's going on today. This becomes just extremely enriching and gives great depth to the teachings and fortitude to ourselves, true fortitude. So as far as what to pay attention to, I would say that find people, that fellow devotees who want to pursue it in that way, with attention, with patience, and it's like a very valuable stone, diamond, and you turn it in different ways and you see different facets, but each facet is just so beautiful. You just want to keep turning it and relishing the different facets of the priceless gem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's one important question. These days, Srila Prabhupada sometimes is depicted in different public fora as a racist or misogynist, or someone who was not as attuned to human needs. And probably it's coming from people who never interacted with him personally, because you and your god sisters like Jamuna Devi and so many of them you described in your book are the example of the contrary. And sometimes for me, it is the strongest argument to the contrary, because when I see such young ladies, young women as yourself, and you describe yourself in the book as an atheist and a feminist, as someone who would never bow down to anyone or surrender to anyone. And then you see the transformation happening very, very quickly into someone who really wanted to surrender her life to Srila Prabhupada, and that by itself, without any force from his side, it's your voluntary decision by itself, that's the strongest argument of how different Srila Prabhupada was from these mistaken depictions. Could you speak a few words about how Srila Prabhupada treated ladies as a general principle that we can and should follow if we want to truly call ourselves his followers?
Yeah, thank you. That's an important point. Sometimes I feel like I'm being an apologist when people quote Prabhupada out of context and appear to make him into this, as you say, racist or misogynist personality. It's painful to hear that. But in fact, as I was saying, he treated each and every person individually. He didn't lump people together. That's such an important point, to honor each individual and respect each individual for the potential they have. I just recently heard a beautiful lecture Prabhupada gave on Bhagavad-Gita. It was chapter 1, text 40. And he gave it in England in 1973. And he was talking about women in that lecture. And he mentioned that the things that he said about women that seemed to be derogatory do not apply to devotee women. He distinguished between non-devotee women and devotee women. That when women come into Krishna's fold, as it were, that they transcend these bodily designations, whatever bodily weaknesses may be there, and they can excel, just as we find in the scriptures with Devahuti and Draupadi and Queen Kunti and so many others. So that's such an important principle. Our movement has been, I think, unnecessarily hindered, crippled, one would say, because of the treatment of women over the years. And in one sense, it's understandable that you have young men who grow up in a licentious society with absolutely no training, no culture, and then they become enthusiastic for spiritual life, but they're expected to be celibate, which is completely contrary to everything they've grown up with and around. And so to try to fit into that mold, their attraction to women becomes aversion. It's the same coin, it just flipped. But in fact, an actual spiritualist should be neutral. And that takes some maturity and some time. But in the meantime, that aversion was so detrimental to both the young men who were trying to be celibate. It was terrible for the women. And it was also terrible for our society. It was what they call a lose-lose-lose scenario. So please, I implore you not to repeat that sordid history as you develop your yatra in Russia. Try to see that that's simply the product of immaturity, personal immaturity, collective immaturity, and do everything you can to avoid that, because it does not help our mission. It does not please Srila Prabhupada.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if you can see it from your side, but present here we have a few very senior ladies, Vaishnavis, who play very important roles in our preaching in Russia and in spiritual guidance and spiritual education, mostly for ladies because it's a natural role for them, but also by their perfect example also for men. And I can introduce them by their names, but I guess they'll be more too embarrassed if I do. So, but they're here, present and listening with gratitude. And we have some of your god sisters visiting Russia for many years, like Mandakini Mataji. She comes very regularly. We had Rukmini Mataji. She came a few times and gave classes. Urmila Devi, she also came, and like that. So we do have that fortunate exposure to their experience and their maturity. I'll ask you a question. We talked about, I'm sorry for asking these questions, but we do have questions coming from devotees as well. But Srila Prabhupada expected his disciples to learn from him and from his example and his maturity. And you could say that you're only as good a spiritual master as your disciple is, as a future spiritual master. Do you see as a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada among your God brothers and God sisters, those who do come, have come to that level of perfect balance between transcendence and compassion, purity and sensitivity, and who have inherited that from Srila Prabhupada and continue bringing it into the lives of others? It's not that we expected to, you're expected to name all of them, of course, because so thousands of them, but if you have some examples of such devotees, maybe not so well known among ourselves, who in your eyes have managed to become that perfect blend, or close to perfect, between spiritual purity and maturity and compassion.
Yeah, I think that it is a tribute to Srila Prabhupada that so many of his disciples have taken his teachings and his mood and his spirit so much to heart that they can carry his message and impact people and transform people's lives. There are simple devotees who have done that. Perhaps, as you say, they're not so well known. We had a devotee here in Alachua. He just passed away last week. His name was Shankar. He was a cook, and he just loved to cook for the devotees. He loved to engage young people in the kitchen. He would teach them cooking and enthuse them, not just about cooking, but also about serving. And he would cook the Sunday feasts in Alachua. This would be for hundreds and hundreds of devotees who would come every Sunday. And then he would go around as the devotees honored the prasadam and ask them how it was and discuss with them about prasadam. So in this way, he really took it to heart, his service of cooking. He took it very seriously, and he tried to instill his enthusiasm in the young people and train them also how to cook so that devotees relished the prasadam. So I think there are many, many people like that. I know Jamuna Devi told me a story that, she was one of the 6 devotees plus Saraswati Devi who was going from San Francisco to London to try to start the temple. And on the way, they stopped off in Montreal in Canada, because Prabhupada was in Montreal. And there they celebrated the Vyasa Puja celebration. So to celebrate, Prabhupada had everyone speak something on the occasion of Vyasa Puja. And they spoke in order from the person who had been devotee longest, spoke first, and so on. And finally, they came to someone who had just arrived at the temple, who was not yet initiated. And he was rolling chapatis in the kitchen. That was his seva. And they asked him to come and speak. And so he was very emotional. And he said, I'm just beginning to understand this philosophy. I'm just beginning to appreciate you, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was personally hearing from them. And he said, I'm just so overwhelmed. My heart is just full with gratitude for what you've done. It was very simple, but very heartfelt. And Prabhupada just was moved. Jamuna said he was moved by that, the simplicity and the purity of that person's words. So it's not complicated. Even the basics of the philosophy, we can understand them quickly. If we listen just in a matter of months, even weeks, you can understand the basic philosophy. But then to have the genuine gratitude for it and to imbibe it to the extent that you can impress upon other people the value of what Prabhupada has given us, that's truly a gift that comes from this purity that this young chapati roller experienced and was able to express that Prabhupada so much appreciated. So you have this transcendence there, the transcendence and also the appreciation, the gratitude, and the inspiration to give it to others, the compassion to give it to others, even in someone so new, so new and inexperienced in spiritual life.
Thank you so much. We have a few more questions from devotees. One is by Bhakti Bhagavatamrita Keshava Maharaj. He's a senior leader of ISKCON in Russia. He travels to many parts of the former Soviet Union. Precious. He's also regional secretary for the southern part of Russia. And he is as a regional secretary asks you, his is a very experienced question. He says, to be president of such a large temple as the Bhaktivedanta Manor is a very troublesome service, I quote him. What inspired you to take up such a great responsibility? And one more devotee adds to that by saying, yes, especially at an age when most people retire into their reclusive bhajan.
Yeah, well, they say, there's a saying in English that says, fools rush in where angels dare not tread. So that's one explanation for sure. But as it happened, my husband and I finished this film, the Hare Krishna film, the mantra, the movement, and the Swami who started it all. And around the same time, I also finished the book, 5 years, 11 months, and a lifetime of unexpected love. So in those two things, they were both huge projects. They were both complete. I was just thinking to myself, I didn't say anything to anyone, but just to myself, I was thinking I've done the same service for over 40 years now, which is writing, photography, filmmaking. It would be very interesting to try something different. I didn't say a word to anyone, but it was a very clear thought that I had. And not long after that, I got a letter from one of the trustees at Bhaktivedanta Manor. And I was quite absorbed in these projects, so I was not up on ISKCON news. And I knew that the former president there was unwell, but I thought he was going to get better and resume his service. But in this letter, the trustee from Bhaktivedanta Manor said that, unfortunately, Srila Prabhupada is not going to get better. He won't resume his service. Would you be interested in coming and becoming president? And so I was so shocked, I couldn't speak about that for 3 days. I was just completely shocked because I never associated myself with a service like that for a moment. But then I thought, well, I had this thought, it was a very clear thought. And then I get this letter. So I guess the two are connected, I suppose. So I said, okay, I'll try. So they put me on what they call probation for 6 months to see if it was suitable for me and suitable for the devotees that I was working with. And then after 6 months, they said, I guess they couldn't find anybody else to do it. They'd already come to the bottom of the barrel, and there I was. So that's what I do right now for the time being. Although I must say it's a very challenging service, and there's tremendous amount of diversity, which I really appreciate, all the diversity of the service. And I'm learning a lot too, which is also stimulating.
And connected with this, there's another question from Apramyatma Prabhu, who is a regional secretary in another part of Russia. Russia is a huge country. We have a lot of regional secretaries here. And he says there is a statement that Srila Prabhupada didn't want ladies to be in charge of temples, and that during Prabhupada's lifetime, he never appointed any woman to an administrative post. If that statement is true, what do you think Prabhupada would have said now if he saw how many Vaishnavist ladies are in charge of temples and even GBC members?
I've never seen a statement where Prabhupada says that he didn't want women in charge of temples. You'd have to show me that statement. There was a time when he was asked, it was by a mother of a devotee. She asked him, you can find it in the database, can a woman be president of a temple? And Prabhupada's answer was yes at that time. And then he went on to explain how women are always meant to be protected, as, but first by their father, then by their husband, then by their grown son. So some devotees hear that and say, well, if women are supposed to be protected, then they can't be president. But that is not what Srila Prabhupada said. He said, yes, they can be president. That was very clear. But they must also be protected. It's two together. So our challenge is to see how she can be protected and be president, because that is Prabhupada's statement. So I would ask that devotee to please give me the source that he didn't want women in charge of temples.
Yeah, that's not his statement. It's just a statement by someone that he quotes. If that question, that's
okay.
that
well, whoever he's quoting, you should go to the source, because otherwise there's so many Prabhupada saids that Prabhupada himself would sometimes chastise us. Some Prabhupada said, if you didn't hear it from me, I didn't say it. So we want to try to stick closely to what he actually said. Otherwise, things become more confused than they already are.
Thank you so much. We don't seem to have any more questions, and maybe concluding question from two concluding questions from my side. The first is, if you're given enough, again, the same 5 years and 11 months and that many days, if you could rewind the clock and start over again, what would you have done differently if you were to travel with Srila Prabhupada all those years and months? Did you take more? Would you have taken more photographs, or would you have spent more time listening to Prabhupada's classes? Would you have taken more responsibility, as he oftentimes sent you away with an assignment like he did when he sent you to Juhu from Mayapur? What would you have done differently on a personal level, on a service level, if anything? Or you would have just done exactly the same thing?
No, I certainly lament today that I didn't take advantage of my time with Prabhupada to have him clarify what he wanted regarding women, like this idea, do you want women in charge of temples or not? Do you want women on your GBC or not? Do you want women to initiate devotees, become spiritual masters or not? The fact that that is not clear today, I think, is very unfortunate, and just due to our immaturity, our lack of foresight. So certainly I would have made all those things as clear and unmistakable as possible, because it's been 15 years now that GBC have been discussing whether women can take disciples or not. And Prabhupada could have cleared it up in 15 minutes or less. So it's a great regret that I have at this moment.
Thank you. And the last question, or maybe a wish from my side, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all of our students. First of all, thank you so much for having given us your time and the precious association and the vision of Srila Prabhupada. And what would your instruction or blessing or wish, or whatever you word, however you word it, for us, your those who follow in your footsteps, trying to follow in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada by learning from you and your god brothers and sisters, what would be your guidance to us, blessing or instruction? So for us, in your book, you write your book actually is just like, you could say it's almost like photography in itself, because when you write about Srila Prabhupada and everything that you are talking about, becomes very vivid and easily visualized. And once when you're traveling from America to India, you stayed at an ashram in, was it in Soho Street or somewhere? Probably not Soho, it was in London. And you say that you went to sleep, but you were so far away from the heater that the heater was more of an idea than an experience. That was your expression. For me, the heat was more of an idea than an experience. So for us to have Srila Prabhupada more of an experience than an idea, even a spiritual and transcendental idea, what would your instruction be? What should we do to make Srila Prabhupada's presence in our lives an experience, or the experience that we can mold our lives after?
Mm. Thank you. That's a beautiful question. I think I would say in response that it's up to each one of us to use our our individual choice properly to fully immerse ourselves, or at least as fully as possible, in the process of sadhana, so that we personally remain strong, that we fully imbibe the teachings. I say fully, but at least as fully as we can at this moment, in terms of chanting, in terms of associating positively with devotees, so that we remain spiritually enlivened, spiritually strong ourselves. And with that foundation, which cannot be underestimated, that each and every one of us have to use preferably the early morning hours to really delve in to the basic process of bhakti yoga processes, including not just hearing the classes, but also ourselves reading and hearing directly from Srila Prabhupada. And with this kind of strength, with this kind of foundation, then we can grow, as they say, organically in many beautiful ways. And without that, we'll become weak and splintered and lose our forward thrust, you could say, personally and collectively. So to make the idea an experience, we need to personally experience it ourselves through these wonderful activities that Prabhupada has given us. And if we can do that first individually, then as small groups and as larger groups, we'll actually taste something of the beauty of Krishna consciousness, the power of it, the ability to transform ourselves, to become satisfied ourselves wherever we are, whatever we're doing. That inner contentment is quite rare. And to become honest with ourselves, and in this way, the whole yatra, if we can do this individually, the whole yatra will become firmly rooted and become very large in something truly extraordinary for Prabhupada's pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank you very much on behalf of all our students and teachers at the Bhaktivedanta University. And we do hope it's not our last time with you. We'll look forward to inviting you more often, or at least a few more times, if your time allows. And I would like to read, because I don't know if you picked up any Russian from your father,
no,
but, but in the chat, devotees write their experience, their thoughts after having your association. One of them, Mahaprabhu Prabhu, wrote, such a wonderful Vaishnavi, sober, grave, calm, kind, deep, and with a lot of integrity. She melted me. Thank you so much. Another one, Rukmini Priya Devi, she is a senior Vaishnavi, also a Shiksha Guru for many devotees. She wrote, yes, she is a true disciple of Srila Prabhupada. You could see his spirit in her, and I'm always inspired by such disciples of Prabhupada and Krishna consciousness. Another one, Mataji Premika from St. Petersburg, a leading book distributor. She says, thank you so much, Mataji Visakha, for such wonderful association and for the questions that were asked. And devotees also expressed their desire to read your book. So thank you so much again. And we'll look forward to more of your association. And if we could be of any service to you, please let us know.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the service that you're doing in Russia. Prabhupada would be so happy to see the movement expanding there as it is under such expert guidance as Bhakti Maharaj and your good self, Madan Mohan Prabhu. So thank you for your company.
Thank you
so
very much.
Appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shrimati Visakha Devi ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.